Hello everyone and welcome to Pop Screen, part of the Geek Show podcast network. We are that corner of the Geek Show that likes to look at the good, the bad and the preposterous of movies either starring, about or by pop stars. No, the podcast covers a broad range of musical and cinematic genres, from country and western to hip-hop, from documentaries to science fiction. I'm your host, Graham Williamson. I'm a writer for the Geek Show, Byline Times, and we are cult as well as a filmmaker myself. And I am joined this week by...
Hi everyone, it's Joe Miller here from the Geek Show's animation podcast, The Dreaming Machine.
Hey Joe.
Clearly a great candidate to do a show about U2, but clearly I've been selected because U2 have done a couple of animated videos, right? So there's a clear connection there.
It. Yeah.
Yeah, and that could be a nice quiz question, exactly what were the two animated videos? But we'll come back to that.
Yes, there's never been. It feels like Bono and the Edge would have done the songs for some big animated movie by now, right? But instead, I think they only did that for the Spider-Man musical, which is a good, solid, sensible choice.
I just know that as a B-side to the Fly single. But yeah, no, sorry, that was the Clockwork Orange musical they did. So you're right, they did a Spider-Man musical more recently as well. You're not aware of that?
I wasn't aware of that, no.
The Fly single, one of the B-sides is like their attempt at a soundtrack to a Clockwork Orange musical, I believe.
Right.
I was full of random trivia about U2, but yeah, there's a Batman song they did in the 90s, and I'll Go Crazy If I Don't Go Crazy Tonight as an animated video, I think, which I bet you may not know, but anyway. So yeah, clearly I'm a great candidate, but yeah, I have a lot to say about U2, and yeah, but from the animated podcast Streaming Machine, check us out, where it's a really fun podcast, and thanks for inviting me here today, Graham.
It's all right. Yes, last time you were on was when we did Idlewild, the Outcast movie.
Indeed.
Which I think we both enjoyed. We're both very big Outcast fans. You are clearly a U2 fan after a fashion, right?
Kind of.
You have a complex relationship with U2.
I have a complicated relationship with them, yeah. I mean, they've done some good songs and good albums, but I'm not really like a massive fan. There's certain like elements of them, and I'm very picky about which bits I like by them.
I would co-sign that, yes. I think you mentioned... Had you seen this film before?
I hadn't, although I felt like I had, because it's kind of like it's become like musical, like shorthand. It's like shorthand for like that point in a certain band's career, right? It's like, yeah, like you might say, like, this is their White Album. You say, oh, this is the Rattle and Hum period where it went down a certain path and maybe went too far. So I felt like I'd seen it, but I hadn't actually seen it. Like I jumped over from Joshua Tree straight to Actung Baby when I was going through the discography. So it was really interesting to watch it, like having felt like I'd watched it and saw all the like mythology and all the story behind it without actually listening to the damn thing.
I remember you had mentioned the quote that Bono gives when they cover Helter Skelter by the Beatles a great many times to me. And I was absolutely floored to realise that this film opens with that.
Yeah, claiming the saving, like this song from Charles Manson,
Yes.
right? I mean, and I do appreciate it was a different time period. Maybe there was a bigger issue, but it's like you don't need to save this song. It's Helter Skelter by the Beatles. You don't. It's not a song that needs saving, especially not with your slightly ropey cover version.
But that sort of sets up, I think, because we should mention before we start, this film has a reputation that is maybe not the reputation it has now. If you look on Letterboxd, it has a very high average rating because I think anyone watching this film in 2023 is watching it because they are a massive YouTube fan. And if that's where you're coming at it from, it's a good viewing experience. The performances made me think, oh yeah, I like you two more than I thought. But
Yeah,
there's also this other element to it.
yeah, it's kind of this, which I think, to be fair to the band, they kind of recognize to an extent,
Hmm. Yeah,
um, about this like savior, like being saviors, like that kind of like feeling to it, and being like sincere, like to a fault,
yeah,
like cubed, like to a ridiculous extent. Um, yeah, but it's interesting you say that. I had the same experience. Like I had a negative view of Rattle and Hum, the film and the music, based on everything I'd read about and heard about, including what the
yeah,
band themselves have said about it. And I actually enjoyed it more than I thought I would. It was like, you know what? They
yeah,
were a good live band.
yeah, absolutely.
And it's well directed. I mean, the
Hmm.
interview questions are like really facile and ridiculous, but that's kind of the fun, like just seeing them pissed off by the interview questions. I think so. Like, it's actually well directed. It's the performances are great. It's really well filmed. And it has like it has like Exit, in God's Country. It has Bad, and it's got like some really powerful like good songs in there. Yeah, so I
Yeah.
can see like either you're a big U2 fan or kind of you're interested in the musical history of it. Maybe might be another like maybe more niche audience who might watch it.
The musical history bit is where I think the problems come in because while there are some good sequences dealing with that, the fact that it opens with a Beatles cover sets the tone in that every song seems to be Bono begging to be part of the rock canon. Every song features like a line from Patti Smith, a refrain from the Rolling Stones. It's recorded at Sun Studio. They cannot stop impressing upon you how you two deserve their place amongst these artists.
I half agree with you. I'll do I'll have a slightly different view on this because like firstly, yes, that's true. Like let's be really clear about that. And it puts me off the band too. And
Yeah.
I'm more forgiving of like, I know I shouldn't be, but more forgiving of like big rock star cliches and heart on your sleeve and stuff like that because of my bits of my musical taste. But they go too far even for me. I mean, the whole thing, like when like I really cringed when like Bono like did the graffitiing like during the song. I just couldn't, like doing another ropey cover, right? It's just
Yes.
like I was like, oh, for God's sakes, really? Like, and then I've had to have to apologize for that afterwards. But I
As
don't
they
know.
should have. I mean, just on aesthetic grounds.
But they didn't even commit to this like big gesture. So like, so that's true. At the same time, my slightly different view is like it's U2 being U2. They're really rubbish at like not being like not thinking about their place in rock and roll history and going, even when they went into more like satirical, like I don't know, not maybe not satirical, but the '90s phase, basically. You know, when they're a
Well,
bit more tongue
yeah,
in cheek. Even that like is sincere to a fault. And
that's
like Bono even
interesting. That
said like, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but like even when they were making Zooropa, I read a quote Bono saying like, "We thought we were making Sergeant Pepper," kind of thing, and like it's just like this might be an EP, it became an out. Like everything had to be a big thing. Like all the tours have to be a really big thing. So I just think it's in the DNA to do this. They just can't help themselves. I think basically.
Yeah, that sort of 90s phase of U2, even up to Pop, a record which I like a lot, is the stretch of U2 that I really enjoy. And I think after the response to Pop, they sort of panicked and they became safe, and they've never really got out of that, in my opinion. But it's interesting. just sort of looking at that in the light of Rattle and Hum, obviously it's a reaction to Rattle and Hum. It's a reaction to having this film where everyone says, "Oh, you're ridiculously self-important," but it's also the work of people who are thinking very hard about what it means to be lightweight and flippant. They are making sort of ironic pop music that doesn't mean anything, with a very careful focus on what that means in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah,
And they got away with it because it was the 90s and everything was ironic and everything had to
yeah.
have a double meaning. So it was fine. But it's like, that's the nearest they can get to just letting their hair down, is to do a whole concept album about what it means to let your hair down.
Yeah, I think you're right actually. And I was having I often get thrown into existential crises when I prepare for podcasts, but I had one like last week or two where I was listening to a lot of like UT's albums again, and a couple for the first time actually, just to get like understand the context a bit more and get
Yeah,
my head around it. And they're actually like you can make the argument they're quite a conservative, like not politically, but like into the music, they're quite a conservative band. So I've
yeah,
got this like theory which may drive people mad, like, but I just want to throw it out there anyway that because they got this like kind of image, at least in the 90s they did, of like being brave and changing their sound.
yeah.
Um, they're actually like quite conservative and slow to change sometimes, I think.
Mm,
So like so when they did Acting Baby, they kind of backed themselves into a corner with Rattle and Hum. When they did All You Can't Leave Behind, they kind of backed themselves into the corner, at least commercially, with the pop album, which had a big
mm.
impact initially, but like long term sales were really low. And so they just like, I don't know, like compared to like other big major rock bands who have like those kind of pretensions, like Coldplay and REM and stuff, that I think they're like a bit braver and like just saying this is this thing, this is
Yeah.
this thing, even if like whether people like it or not, they're like a bit more like distinct. Whereas I think you two can get a bit muddled sometimes. Which is why it partly makes it really interesting, like history when you go through their albums and things. But
Yeah, I
yeah,
think that's probably true, and I can easily imagine a situation where Rattle and Hum was a huge hit and everyone loved it, where they would just carry on down this path and not adjust at all.
yeah, but it doesn't like because of them wanting their place in rock history, they just can't help themselves. Everything has to be a
Yeah,
thing.
yeah,
Like some people are happy just doing the same thing. Like Adele, like she's happy just doing the same thing, like pretty much again and again and again. Like with
yeah,
respect to her, like there's like you could argue the album's changed a little bit, but it's still kind of there's certain bands and artists who like doing the same kind of thing,
yeah,
and they kind of do it, but they have pretensions of making big statements and pretending like they're changing a lot at the same time. It's kind of a weird mix. Like
yeah,
no line on the horizon, like which is meant to be then getting a bit more experimental. They like wussed out like halfway through, and it just kind of didn't really do anything, arguably. So yeah, just like so Rattle Hum like it's similar thing where it was them kind of just going too far down that rootsy like American history path, really. Um, Even though it has good moments within it and it's still interesting to watch, like it is misguided at the end of the day.
So did that start in terms of the band's development? Did that start on the Joshua Tree? Was that their first kind of attempt to make a big statement on America and the roots of rock and roll?
Yeah, I mean, you could say like lyrically, um, like Unforgettable Fire, like maybe has like references to that kind of stuff, but yeah, so Unforgettable Fire, they bring in Brian Eno, like the record company's not happy with it at all, and Daniel Lanois, and they kind of get that like dream producing team, and then they hit out the park with the Joshua Tree,
Yeah,
and that yeah, and they really go. You're right, they really go for that kind of style. Like even like have like Red Hill Mining Town, like really like Trip Through Your Wires, is that another one? Like they really go for that like kind of like homespun, like really rooted in America, like kind of in a slightly fake way because they're Irish, of course.
yeah,
But
yeah,
so yeah, I think that is the starting of that. but because the songs are good and kind of a bit weirder than you remember when you listen back to the album, a bit more like interesting. It is like a proper album. It kind of works, I think.
Yeah, you mentioned some of the songs in here that did work, and I do think there are some terrific performances. You mentioned Exit, which I think sounds fantastic.
Yeah, Exit's brilliant, and like I was delighted to see that was in the. I was really surprised to see that was in the set list actually.
Exit is the one which really makes, as hard as it can be to sort of realise and understand this now, Exit is the one that makes you realise, oh, this band were contemporaries of people like Joy Division and Young Marble Giants.
Yeah, and the first couple of albums got criticized for being like too Joy Division like. I think, and I
Yeah.
think that's definitely true. But that's where the influence just works. It's brilliant. I mean, it's interesting as well. I think I mentioned this to you before. I was really struggling to find a reliable source for this.
Mm.
So like, it is a bit speculative. But I know like Kirsty McCall apparently was involved in setting the track listing for the Joshua Tree.
Yeah.
So that bit's like confirmed. I think that's true. Like she was like she was in a relationship with one of the producers. But I read somewhere and I can't find a source for it, annoyingly. So I can't like confirm this. Where there's this theory that the track list is based on her favorite to least favorite tracks in order. So on that basis, Exit. And so the first track and last track was set in stone, and then the rest was what they decided on. So on that basis, she did not like Exit because that's right
Right.
there. If that's true. But anyway, that's a slight digression. But yeah, but it's a great song, and they gets recognized and stuff, and it's like really like vital and exciting sound to it. Like they
Yeah.
are like a band firing on all cylinders.
Yeah, if you edited this film down to the concert footage, I do not think anyone would have a problem with it at all.
But
But
there's other stuff too.
yeah, the problem is, as soon as you get past the first segment, you've got the first of those interview segments, and I was like, I want to say justice for Adam Clayton at this point, because they're asked why they wanted to do this film, and Clayton says something like, "I hope it'll be a musical journey," and they all just crack up laughing at that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, hang on, that doesn't even crack the top 30 most pretentious quotes in the film.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Indeed. I mean but the fact they can't answer that question properly, that shows how
Yeah.
misguided they were. They couldn't even give a proper answer, like why they're doing the movie, and it just totally lacks. It's not quite a concert film because they do this other stuff.
Hmm.
The only bit of that other stuff that works is where they're like giving like non because I think the critics at the time like criticized them for being monosyllabic and some of the answers and things. Like they're the best bits because some of the questions are kind of dumb. Like what have you been
Yeah.
up to since your last album? Like where the hell do
Yeah.
you start? Like what do you mean? Like my personal life,
Yeah.
anything, whatever.
Golfing, I don't know.
Like come on, man. So it's
Yeah.
like so well yeah, but so that's like feels like a real human moment and just like letting stuff speak for itself. But there's other stuff where it just gets too pretentious, basically, as you say. I think you're right.
Yeah, because like after Clayton sort of makes them all laugh with his apparently ridiculous answer, Larry Mullen says, "Oh, we wanted to capture this era of the band because we're not the same band as we were in the war era." Yeah, it's yeah, it's been a few years since that. So, there's an insularity to
Yeah.
it. You can see the kind of belief that, oh, of course it'll be a good film because everything we do is just so fascinating. The fact that we've changed over the past few years, that's really interesting, isn't it? People will be
And
fascinated.
they're not changed that much. Like it
No,
doesn't even work on that basis anyway, you know.
no.
Yeah. I mean, you, the band realized it. The quotes that came out on the Love Town tour, like it did shortly after Rattle and Hum.
Mm,
So Rattle and Hum wasn't the film wasn't that big a box office success, I don't think, and they did Love Town tour after, and yeah, like they said, oh, we've got to go away and dream it all up again. and we were the biggest band, but not the best kind of thing. So,
Right.
but they recognized it after the movie was made. So when it was like too late to do anything about those kind of moments.
Yeah. I mean, I don't sort of mind the interstitial conversations they have that much because, as you say, they are mostly dull questions and they get dull answers, and it's
Yeah.
really kind of on the sort of film's creative team to cut some of this stuff down. I don't begrudge the band for it. The problem comes, the thing that everyone mocked comes with Bono's bloody on stage monologues.
Yeah. I don't know. I wasn't as negative, but I know I've read like people they diss that basically, like criticize that. I mean, I can obviously the monologue that should get praise is the one about the terrorist attack and things. So you can understand that because it just happened like earlier that day or something on the concert, and that
Yeah,
was really powerful.
that's
Um,
raw. That's not planned. That it doesn't
yeah.
have that aspect where it's like they talk about the Enniskillen massacre, and it's as you say, it had just happened, and you could tell that this is something that Bono is
Mm.
actually feeling rather than something that he's, thought carefully about where he wants to position himself on. And it's good. You can appreciate it from that standpoint.
Yeah, it's just like the other monologues don't quite work as well. Um,
The one about artists against apartheid, as Bono pronounces it.
it's like, man, like we totally agree with the sentiment. It's just like maybe the execution of it isn't quite right there. Yeah, yeah.
It's like he gets quite pissy with the crowd for being, I think, quite rightly bored by the spectacle of a rock star going on a lengthy conversation about economic sanctions, repeatedly using the words economic sanctions, which I think may be the least rock and roll words in the dictionary. He goes, "Am I bugging you? I don't mean to bug you." And it's like, come on, man. These people just want to hear pride in the name of love. What are you doing?
That was really funny. He said, "Oh yeah, I don't mean to bug you." It's like, okay, we're getting pissy now, aren't we, Bono? It's like, yeah, no, exactly. Although it did remind me in a nice way of the U2's cameo on The Simpsons.
Yes.
I don't even remember this where Homer invades the stage and because he's trying to become the sanitation commissioner or something, and they're trying to kick
Yes.
him off. And Bono says, "No, wait, everyone. This is like really important. Like we have to we got to understand sanitation, the politics of sanitation. Like let's let the man speak." It's like yeah, at least they kind of eventually realize that diatribe, and yeah, that monologuing the feeling they had to monologue all the time basically about that stuff and feel like they were changing the world
Oh yeah,
when
because
they weren't.
as you rightly say, there is not a single political point in that monologue about apartheid that any reasonable person could disagree with, and yet you just watch it and think, "Oh, shut up!
You
Stop
see,
talking."
maybe it's just the way my brain works. Is so one extreme would be just to not do that, right? The
Hmm.
other extreme, was probably what I would do would be to have a PowerPoint presentation and break it down into practicalities. Just really, if you're gonna do it, just really go for it and do this very analytical approach.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see Vampire Weekend doing that.
I mean, I think to be fair to you too,
Mm,
because they get criticized for this a lot. So I totally agree. Rattle and Hum, it just doesn't. Bits of it just don't work, and it's awkward, and yeah.
yeah,
I think sometimes they get a bit too much criticism for this stuff because it's kind of in their DNA. I mean,
yeah,
yeah, that obviously the tax avoidance stuff wasn't great. Let's not dwell on that. But yeah, they probably have. I've not looked at the figures, but they probably have done quite a lot for charity and given quite a lot of money away. And they put, and I was reading this thing about the peace agreement in Ireland,
yeah.
and is Bono's weirdly like like weirdly involved in that, and like I think it's partly because the politicians on both sides didn't want to like upset the cool rock star who really was like really going for them, like to get the deal at the Good Friday, the
Yeah,
agreement over the line. Like, was reading this article on it, so like so I do get like they probably have had a positive impact and things like that, but it just like so I defend them a little bit and that kind of stuff. But yeah, Rattle and Hum, they just go too far and it's just too awkward and it's just
yeah,
like it's just and it's more the tone of it. I don't even like. I think like one of the members in the in interstitial bit says like, "Oh, like, I think it's Adam Clayton who says oh, like I think it's rubbish. You can't talk about politics." It's like I agree with you. Yeah,
yeah,
musicians are human beings, and I think there's been too much of a reaction to that where you feel like you can't say anything without people rolling your eyes and stuff. It's like that's
yeah,
fine, but it's just like the tone of it is so like self-congratulatory and
yeah. And
like it's a dead end. Like,
I
yeah,
feel like anyone watching this film who did not know the history of South Africa would just assume that it ended because of Bono. That Bono was really the guy who, much more than Nelson Mandela or Desmond Tutu or any of those other comparatively minor
no, of
figures
course.
in the end of apartheid, Bono definitely did it. But yeah, while we're defending Bono, I will say that there was something that occurred to me when I was watching it that I can't quite answer, which is that Bono's belief that rock and roll is like this sacred force for good and rock stars should be leading the way on everything is not a million miles away from how Bruce Springsteen talks about rock and roll.
Mm.
Yet no one really has a problem with Bruce Springsteen in the way they do with Bono.
Yeah, um,
And I
that's a
don't
good
know why
point.
that is. I just thought it was odd.
Yeah, I can't even. I don't know why either. I can't even explain it because the explanations that jump to mind about like Bruce Springsteen's viewed as a more blue collar guy, and
Yeah,
I don't think really. I don't think Bono. Like, I don't think if you compare them, like he is like much more privileged necessarily in his background or anything. I can't really explain it. Yeah,
yeah.
I guess this like public image just takes hold, doesn't it?
It is. I think it's very easy to believe in Bruce Springsteen as someone who's like in touch with his blue collar grafting roots when he like plays concerts where the council have
Yeah.
to unplug it to get him to stop. But yeah, and Bono just for all as you say, I don't think he comes from like a massively overprivileged background or anything like that, but there is just something about him. Maybe it's the sunglasses where you think you like being part of the international jet set a bit more than you were
Well,
letting on.
yeah, maybe, but I think didn't he say he had like an eye condition or something? Like, there's a reason he was like,
I didn't know that.
yeah, it was on this Graham Norton interview when he revealed it. I was like,
Oh,
okay,
right.
I bet a lot of people feel like bad about themselves, all the comments they've done.
Yeah.
Like, um, and it's just like, I do wonder as well, like, I this once again like hugely speculative theory and
Yeah.
probably not true, but it's just like, I wonder if like people like there were maybe certain expectations about like especially in Britain about like what a rock star should be and like not be over pretentious or have ideas but be station kind of thing and
Oh, yeah. We
be
we
super
are.
grateful about do you know what I mean? Whereas like maybe nowadays there's a bit more
Yeah,
variation and you accept like certain things.
we are very good at cutting people down for being too ambitious or too outspoken. Yes, that is true.
Like I remember this great Paul McCartney quote when where he talked about people like criticizing him for being arrogant. It's like,
Mm.
well, he's like, well, he asked me if I think I'm good at songwriting, and the answer is yes. Of course, I think. Like, is that yeah? Why do we get so annoyed by people being factual about things?
Yes,
Like it's good. Like you're not really down. You can recognize what you're good and bad at. It's just and I do feel like hugely speculative. Like no evidence for this, but it just feels like there's less of that criticism of arrogance and I think like because you get like pop music's maybe more international and it's okay to be confident and have that attitude actually helps in like selling a song. People recognize that more, maybe.
I think in terms of like modern pop music as opposed to like any kind of historic rock music, what has changed is that pop stars have become very good at selling their self-confidence as being like a gift to you. I noticed this around like the start of the 2010s. I felt like every pop star wanted to be my life coach. And, I hate it, but it worked. People who
Yeah.
like Beyonce or Lady Gaga like them because they see them as inspiring figures, and that's something that pop stars that is a standard part of a pop star's appeal now.
You could actually, yeah. It's I'm saying it as a good thing, but it's arguably not a good thing because if you're part of like, is it the Beehive if you're a Beyonce fan,
Yeah, yeah.
or you're Monster if you're part of Lady Gaga, or you're the Army if you're part of BTS. It's kind of like, yeah, this is my tribe that work. You could argue they do good things for each other, whatever. As a community, that's great, but it is kind of like in worship of this idol at the top of it.
Mm, yeah.
That's maybe not the most healthy thing in the world in a way.
It isn't. I wish someone should make a HBO show based on that premise, preferably with the guy who did Euphoria. I bet that would be the best show ever made.
I have to confess, I've not seen it, and I'm careful not to comment on things I've not seen. Although, yeah, like it's been, people haven't been kind to it. Let's say, have they?
No, I don't have your ethical qualms about this. I haven't seen it and I hate it.
uh,
Yeah. But yeah, I know exactly what you mean, and I think anyone who's like met a Nicki Minaj fan is aware that pop fandom can lead people down some really toxic paths. But
mm,
it's also just like I think it's artistically bad. The pop star who to a great extent turned me around on mainstream chart music and brought me back to it for the same time for the first time since I was a kid was Taylor Swift. And I think it's telling that her one stab at doing big, affirmative, I'm awesome, and therefore by extension, you're awesome kind of pop that everyone else was doing when she was coming up is Me, which is probably the worst single she's ever released.
yeah, but yeah, I do take your point though. Um,
Mm.
I mean, at the same time, even though like some of the messaging you get out of that is like, you know, cliched or like too like is it too too hallmark basically and things. Actually, in this messed up world, maybe it's quite nice that people like put out positive messages as well on the
Oh
flip
yeah,
side.
yeah. But we're back to sort of Bono talking about how apartheid is bad, really, aren't we? When Katy Perry tells me that self-esteem is a good thing and we should all have it, no disagreement there. I just have a problem with the art that is then made from these sentiments.
Yeah, you know what? Maybe it all comes down, yeah, because we kind of gone around because there's a complex issue, right? And
Yeah,
this is part of the existential crisis I've had, like with you too as well. Is that, but at the end of the day, if the song's good enough, you get away with stuff, right?
totally. Yeah.
And Rattle and Hum, the new songs they did weren't quite as good as the two albums before, arguably. Like the
Yes,
covers and like all those
yeah.
new snippets they did and stuff.
I mean, it's interesting how I'm looking at my notes, and most of the songs that I've noted down are songs that were not on Rattle and Hum, the album. I mean, which were the new songs here, by the way?
Yeah, they did. I'd have to look at my notes again for the titles, but yeah,
Yeah, well, that's an indictment in itself in a lot of
yeah,
ways, isn't it?
exactly.
Yeah,
Like Desire was like the big single, obviously,
yeah.
and that was a new one. But it's and there's a couple towards the end of the set list that were like that were relatively new as well. Was Angel? Was Angel of Harlem a new one as well? Actually, um, anyway,
I'm
I
not.
digress.
Yeah, I'm not sure how controversial it is for me to say this, but I'm not fond of Angel of Harlem.
No, me neither. And like the most vital performances are with the older stuff, and that's not just me. Like clearly, I know like those albums better. Like, but like honestly, like trying to watch it objectively and watch all the songs, like I think that they were the most vital pieces. I mean, having said that, I did like a couple of the moments with guest stars. Although one of
Yeah,
them was on a Joshua Tree track, still haven't found what I'm looking for with the Harlem Choir in that a gospel
yeah,
choir.
yeah,
And vocally that's like amazing, that
yeah,
performance. And finally, I listened to the album as well, like separately, the album version, and it wasn't as powerful as seeing them like in a room together just doing it as like the compared to like the live performance like in front of an audience, because that
yeah.
kind of connection with each other was amazing and felt a bit more real. And but also BB King, I was like, huh, you know what, this is a stupidly redundant comment, but he's a good guitarist, isn't he? Like
He
as like
is.
as someone in the
Yes.
band, as someone in the band would be like, it'd be quite nice if you could just call him in and say, "Oh, just can you just add some guitar overdubs to this? Would that be okay?"
Yeah, absolutely. I want to talk a bit about guitar playing because I do like the Edge's guitar playing, and it's kind of unfortunate that this has like one of the most mockable bits is when Bono has just like gone off pouting because the crowd don't want to hear about economic sanctions on South Africa. And he goes, "Go on, Edge, play the blues." And he plays something that could not sound less like the blues if it was like an album of children's nursery rhymes. But, you know, a genuinely groundbreaking guitarist. And I don't know if you've ever seen that film, It Might Get Loud.
No, no,
It might get like it's you know it's kind of an interesting film. It's not great, but it's watchable. It's like a multi-generational guitar hero summit with the Edge and Jimmy Page and Jack White all
yeah,
talking about their playing. And there is a moment where the Edge starts playing the opening riff to Elevation, and he starts playing it and he then cuts out all the effects pedals, and I swear to god it is exactly like that moment in that Bill Bailey stand-up show where
yes,
he pretends to be the Edge and is all of his effects pedals cut out and he's just like playing one note over and over again underneath it. But he absolutely admits that that is what he is doing. He is really energized by the fact that there is this technology now that can take quite a simple melody and blow it up into this big sort of techno wall of sound. That that's part of what he does.
yeah. No, I like 80% agree. I still think he just like he needs to like vary it up a little bit more, because like there's other like guitarists like who, I was like Johnny Buckland from Coldplay. Like when Brian Eno came in to like
Mm,
fix the band after like X and Y was a massive mistake. Like he said that he encouraged him to use different pedals, different sounds. So you could hear like the guitar just sounded really different. Like
yeah,
I mean, I was listening to like, the latest run of like noughties and like 2010 albums UT did, and the guitar still kind of sounds the same as like the 80s style, like just different effects on it, but it still came.
yeah,
At the same time, though, he's written some of the most iconic, like beautiful, soaring guitar lines ever. He's
yeah,
responsible for maybe it's at least in the top five favorite guitar solos. With the solo on the fly is like unbelievable, stunning.
yeah.
Um, yeah, and that epic solo he does in the concert is great. I forget the track title, but that's great too as well. With
Is
the
it for Bullet the Blue Sky?
oh, it might be, yeah.
Yeah,
That was really good, by the way, that performance. But
yeah,
yeah, so he is a really good guitarist, and there's nothing wrong with using those effects. I just like I just love to sneak into his equipment, like, and just add a couple of pedals without him noticing,
yeah,
or like just because he's so good, like he's so talented. Like I just feel like, I mean, I'm being a bit harsh maybe. I know Zoorope and Pop had like was a bit more varied, like guitar wise. To be fair, yeah,
Discotheque, I think, is a amazing song guitar wise because everyone just sort of accepts that as a sort of big clubby dancey track, but the riffs on it are really heavy, and he
yeah,
somehow manages to make that into part of the texture of it. It's again, it's one of those things where part of what I do love about those albums is that they do feel like they hit the 90s zeitgeist and that kind of we're a rock band, but we also like techno thing was something that was like very specifically you could only get away with in the 90s. Nowadays, if you were like a rock band and you said, I'll tell you what, we also like some dance music, and you're like, yeah, everyone does. What are you on about? You know, the idea of a rock band using sequences and samples is not groundbreaking anymore. But there's something really fun about seeing U2 just a few years after they were anointing themselves the Irish kings of the
yeah.
blues suddenly go for like that big techno production and postmodernism like kids in candy shops. I think it's great.
Yeah, I think you're right actually. And like, even though I said you could argue they're quite slow to change and that they're not as like forward thinking as people maybe give them credit for, when they do change, they do really go for it.
Yeah.
On the flip side, so like they maybe do one album too many in a certain vein, but then they're like, but when they do change it, they really go for it. And like, whereas now I think I'm gonna sound so old here, but it's just like, yeah, like yeah, it's not a big deal now to like incorporate dance and electronica, but it's just so
Mm.
like sanitized and like streamlined, and it's just like whereas like if you hear like discotheque and the like ridiculously chopped up processed guitar and like
Yeah.
and uh and the kind of dance beat and the video like is amazing too actually, but like it's just all of it, it's just like they really go for it, so you gotta give them credit for that I think. um but although I know it's a bit of a digression, but that kind of backs up what I think about how they kind of don't know what they're doing as a band sometimes, like for a
Mm.
weirdly like big act. So like because the pop album they re-recorded several of the songs for like the best of, like viewing it as a big failure. And
Yeah.
like maybe is I don't appreciate it's subjective, but for me like the re-recorded version of Discotheque's nowhere near as good as the original kind of thing. Like I just like, and the same with Rattle and Hum, like they don't quite know what they're good at or what they're bad at or like what the right direction is. They lose away sometimes in their career, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's part and parcel of being that big because you sort of lose the freedom to say, oh, this album that was a big hit is an album that I don't like. At best, you can get away with having like one song that's your creep, you know, that's the big hit that you don't like playing anymore.
Yeah.
But otherwise, it all reminds me of who was I reading? I think a very old interview with Brad Pitt, uh, where he said someone said to him, "Oh, Tom Hanks said that his worst film was some like trashy teen comedy he made back at the start of his career," and Pitt said, "Wouldn't it be funny if he said it was Forrest Gump, though?" And I think that's the problem that anyone who's that famous has, that even if you two sincerely believed that, say, The Joshua Tree or Boy was their worst album, they couldn't re record it for the greatest hits. They know that people are buying the greatest hits for those songs. And so
Yeah.
any kind of, I mean, you and I are both Manic Street Preachers fans, and I sort of wish they'd stop dicking around with their reissues as well.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's true. Like I think some bands kind of yeah, they go over safe basically.
Yeah.
I mean Manic Street Preachers like when they did the Know Your Enemy reissue, I was pleasantly surprised because they kept the rough edges and the cool bits as they did
Yeah,
it.
that was interesting. I
So
think
like
mostly it's just like I hate underdogs, but I also kind of get annoyed when they replace it with a B-side for the reissue of that album. It's like, well,
Yeah,
own what you did.
and like yeah, like this is my truth reissue. They replaced what they added prologue to history, which is a fantastic song, but isn't really like that
Doesn't fit.
style. And
Doesn't fit
nobody
on the
loved
album
you
at all.
did fit
Yeah,
and was quite shocking, like when it comes on and wakes you up, kind of thing. Um,
absolutely agree.
yeah, so they're not. So UT aren't the only band to like not understand themselves.
No, no. I think it's probably more common that you think that there are artists who have this panic reaction whenever something doesn't go over big. I guess maybe part of this is a compliment. Maybe there just aren't enough big artists who take big swings and therefore find out that the public don't like what they're doing. Maybe some artists
yeah,
just play it so safe that they never have this dilemma at all.
yeah, I think that's true. Like I don't really have a counterpoint. I agree. I think that's the kind of thing I miss is like these big. I mean, you get big segments in other ways. Like you do, Beyonce did a visual album.
Yeah,
You get certain bands who are like massive, and they make the way they release the songs and the albums and the artwork and videos that goes with it is spectacular and like really interesting. But
yeah.
because of stylistic shifts in the music, and they don't really get that like as much anymore. I'd argue. I think that's true, really. Like a lot of it,
Yeah.
and I mean, I think what is maybe I mean, it's not all like negative. I guess like there's a lot of more genres like crossing over to each other, so there's maybe less of a big deal as well to an extent.
Yeah, I think so. Sometimes you get that kind of eclecticism like in the course of an album. I think it's delightful that Megan the Stallion can just like do a house track in the middle of her last album and absolutely ace it. I love that album. I love that song.
Yeah,
Um, but I have this pet theory about it that it's partly because record companies are like either not part of an artist's development or they are just so stingy now. Because when you read about artists in the past, even artists who weren't like massive sellers, who weren't hugely successful, when you read about those artists getting like 5 or 6 album deals as standards, you think, oh yeah, it's probably quite easy to experiment there, isn't it? Like someone like Elvis Costello, who I am a huge fan of, his career makes so much sense if you imagine him going into the studio thinking, well, I could record a jazz album and I could record a country album because they they can't get rid of me if these things go wrong. If this goes disastrously wrong, I can always just bang out another, like fill out my contract with another load of 3-minute pop punk songs. I can do that. And now,
yeah,
of course, record companies are so cash strapped that they can't give out contracts of those lengths anymore. So you've got 3 album contracts, and there's pressure for each album to top the last one in terms of being like streamlined and polished and commercial and playing to your strengths. And this is how you get bands like Tame Impala, who like about 10 years ago I was quite a fan of. And then they
right.
started streamlining their sound, and they've got to a point now where they've really smoothed out anything remotely interesting about it.
Yeah, no, I think yeah, I do totally get where you're coming from. I think there's a lot of truth in what you're saying. I do think I mean there is like an art to crafting a good song. Like
Yeah,
which as I get older I recognize that more. Um
yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
um because I was very much of the theory that like you should always be pushing yourself forward, doing something different every album, and like there is like like some bands and artists aren't good at that,
mm,
and like as you'll have covered, like and you know, so I do get that, and like if you write the songwriting craft and that kind of thing, but yeah, but there should still be a bit more like um yeah, I still think some bands it's important for them that each album is its own thing and is a big statement. Like, and
yeah,
U2's one of them. and I think they lost their way a bit, like No Line on the Horizon, where they don't fully commit to that and they just hold back a bit. And it's
Yeah,
not a massive surprise they're the ones who like have the least impact commercially. I think, like very
yeah,
simply.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
um, and so yeah, it is interesting though. I mean, I do get that it's quite easy for me and you to say this after the fact as well. When like
Yeah,
when you're in the maelstrom, like there's always a craziness going on, and you two have hit in the 80s. They had hit the big time, Joshua Tree,
completely.
like Unforgettable Fire was a big album, and like Pride was a massive track. But the Joshua Tree like was just incredible, like exponentially like larger and bigger and crazier. So you can understand why like there'd be all these pressures and things to do certain things, and not really knowing where you should start. I mean, but I just wish I was around to say, don't start with a cover of Helter Skelter, like done not as well as the original Beatles version.
It's one of those things too, isn't it? It always staggers me that there was a time when U2, REM, and the Smiths were kind of at the same level. In the mid 80s, those bands were
Yeah,
kind of as big as each other. They were big, kind of college indie bands, as big as you can get within that sphere, but they weren't yet stadium bands. And of course, U2 became that and stayed that. REM became that and
hmm
stopped being that after a while, but still, remained big. Um, just not quite as big as U2. And the Smiths imploded before they could get anywhere near that. But
yeah,
it does make you very aware that there is a parallel universe version of U2 that split up after the Joshua Tree and are now just sanctified, and now just considered one of the greatest bands who never got their fair shake. It is
yeah,
quite
yeah,
strange to think of them that way, but it's true.
yeah. No, I think that's true, and it is really interesting. And like, I'm glad they did. Like, I'm glad we're not in that alternative universe because a lot of the '90s stuff, as we both said, was like fantastic. So,
Yeah,
so yeah, so I think like going into it, it was that I understood that Rattle and Hum was them going too far, them going like just not as interesting, and then that led to them realizing their mistakes.
yeah,
And I think that's still true, having seen it. but
yeah,
I still like I enjoyed bits of it a lot more than I expected because the quality of the music and the quality of the performance, and just knowing that you two are going to be very you two and how they go about things. Like,
yeah.
so I actually enjoyed it. I was into it more than I thought I would be, like, in preparation. But I'm still like, yeah, I'm still glad they, like, acting baby was definitely the right direction after, I'd say.
Definitely, yes, yeah. There's a couple of bits that I think we have to talk about because they are so extraordinarily self-parodic. I mean, which one of them is it who goes out to Elvis's grave?
Oh yeah, yeah. I can't remember which member, but I remember that scene. Yeah.
And this is after Spinal Taps came out.
Didn't someone let a critic say it reminded them of the Spinal Tap movie?
How could it
Like,
not? How could you be thinking of anything other than Spinal Tap? The miracle
yeah,
is that whichever band member it is wasn't thinking about Spinal Tap when they were following him with a camcorder waxing lyrical at the grave of Elvis.
yeah,
Bizarre stuff.
yeah. And even like the moments that should be good, like when they discover that like is a blues duo or something in the street performing.
Oh yeah, yeah,
I mean, that's quite a nice moment, and like I'm not doubting that they aren't like sincerely enjoying that, but it's
yeah,
just like it just feels a bit like queasy how the focus is on like the edge, like watching them, and it's like, okay, they've deigned their approval. I'm not saying
yeah,
I
yeah.
honestly don't think the band were trying to do that, but it's just the way it's shot, and
Oh, definitely,
it's just
yeah,
suffocating, like
yeah,
it's like too much love of this band kind of thing. Which,
yeah.
yeah, I know it's a weird thing to say for a concert movie, but yeah.
No, I absolutely think that's true. Like you, I think they went into that scene with the best intentions, but it is like it's sort of like paying in exposure, isn't it? It's like here's a couple of homeless people. We're going to put them in our documentary about the world's biggest rock band. You're welcome. Shh.
Yeah, it's just messy and lacks focus, and tonally is off. That are my three takeaways, I think.
That's good. Yeah, I think I can go with that as a poster quote.
But if anyone is watching slash listening to this and not seeing it, like, do check out some of the performances are great. I mean, I kind of wish they did it all in black and white. Like, I don't. I mean, the color scenes are good too, but I just love the black and white shots of them. That's bits of that where it works.
Yeah, I get that, but I will say the colour photography is by Jordan Cronenweth, who had just finished shooting Stop Making Sense, so he knows what he's doing. And the moment you see the first colour in the film during Where the Streets Have No Name, I think that's a really magic moment.
Fair point. Fair point. Like, and it's still brilliantly shot. Um,
Yeah,
and of course the American flag during Bullet the Blue Sky,
yeah.
which wouldn't work in black. Well, maybe it would actually, but um,
It would look like they
it,
were trying to do a homage to Sly and the Family Stone, and I think they've,
yeah.
yeah, they've probably tipped their hats to enough, enough greats of the '60s by this point in the film.
Oh god, yeah. It's like we should emphasize actually. So I know it's a bit. I know it's kind of going to a nice conclusion there, but I do want to say, like, the covers are weirdly, like, not very good. Like, it's weird. I say weirdly because the other performances are so energizing and
Spot on.
great.
Yeah,
And it's just like all along the Watchtower. It's like, I mean, not only is it really an imaginative choice for a cover, but it's just like I was just surprised at how, like, anodyne and like lifeless it was. It was weird. I didn't.
I agree. I think part of the problem is that, like I said, they are performing these songs so they can impress upon you that they respect the music, and it's like that's all I get from that song. I understand that they respect Bob Dylan, which is like, yeah, who doesn't? But it's not exciting.
Nah, yeah, it's just weird. Like, it kind of. I mean, it kind of should be in a way, but I think you're right. That probably is the reason. It's just like it doesn't, like, from a musical perspective. It lacks, like, it just seems off. It just lacks vibrancy. I can't even explain it, but it just doesn't work.
I think
Um,
cover versions of a rarer talent than people think as well. I think that the number of artists who I think are genuinely great at cover versions is very slim, in my opinion. Bowie became good at cover versions. He had a few absolute clangers in his early career, but by his later albums, he'd become really good at cover versions. Johnny Cash obviously made every song his own. I always look forward to a new Cat Power covers album,
yeah,
but these people are the exceptions. They really are the exceptions.
yeah, I agree with you actually. Like, as a big Beatles fan, like, I've just heard so many of their songs massacred. Like,
Yeah, yeah,
but yeah, Cat Power, like, is fantastic at covers, and Johnny Cash, as you
definitely.
say.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's just like but it's just because they open with one, and it makes such a big deal out of the covers. Yeah, it's just like it makes it even worse. Like, normally, like, a band like squirrels away a dodgy cover towards the end of the set list. It's not
I
about
just
a big
can't
deal.
get my head around opening with it. It's literally saying to the audience, "Hey, are you here to see you too? Well, tough. Wait your turn. They're going to do this first."
I mean, I do like that you two are a bit mad in the set lists. Weirdly, like,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
I got a Pop Mart DVD, the Pop Mart tour DVD.
yeah.
And just like the set list is all over the place, and I love it. I think there's that thing of, like, I got open with a big song, and then I read this quote about Elton John actually prepping for Glastonbury. It's like, yeah, you start off big, and then like you calm it down.
Yeah.
You use a really crude like sexual analogy for it, but that's what you're saying. And then like you have a big finish like towards the end. It's like, but no, actually, I kind of like it where like you're on your toes
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it's like you have the weird deep cuts and they have big things like in a row and like so I do give you two credit for that, but it's just like but it just doesn't work. Yeah, like I guess you're gonna have hits and misses if you do that, and yeah,
Yeah. But yes, I think that's covered it quite nicely. I think I feel like I should probably go back to some of those 90s U2 albums, maybe, because you've reminded me how much I did love them at the time.
yeah. It was a lovely excuse for me to re-listen to some of that as well. Like even though I felt like should have kept it as an EP, I do think Zooropa is like really underrated. There's some brilliant songs on there. Um, and you mentioned pop as well. And like I do think they just kind of like they don't really have a certain like theme at the moment as a band. Maybe the last few like songs of innocence for the Apple debacle and stuff. And
Yeah, that was the theme for that album. We're going to really piss everyone off.
yeah, and some of that was overstated. It was just like it was a bit annoying, but like I think people maybe I remember my computer having Buddy Holly video, which is way better. Like that was an amazing like a Weezer video, but like yeah, I'm used to like computers having songs built in, so it was
Yeah,
a bit
yeah.
overstated. Like how like, but at the same time, but musically there wasn't like a massively clear direction from that period. Um,
I think that
and
the titles are more conceptual than the
yeah,
albums at this stage, aren't they?
yeah. So it is like from so like even so the later stuff like is a bit underrated. Has some good songs in the albums, but I just think the '90s was when they were really going for that like that
Yeah.
some of the best songs, and they're really going like thematically like really strong like in what they're doing. So yeah,
I mean, Songs of Innocence did at least inspire that amazing joke in Popstar Never Stop, Never Stopping, where Conor for Real releases his new album in fridges, and every time you open your fridge, it just plays it at you whether you like it or not.
yeah, it's weird. It's weird that, isn't it? Like another digression. Like it wouldn't be a podcast without digressions.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean that film's fantastic. It's so funny that film.
Yes.
But yeah, I remember like I had like so I got the Wingspan like best of Paul McCartney and Wings like
Oh, yeah.
compilation
Yeah.
because I was a weird teenager, right? And I saw this documentary. A lot of these things like this is like '90s noughties things, right? There's a VH1 documentaries, right? So
Yeah.
U2, I got the Joshua Tree because VH1 had the top 100 albums program, right? These
Yeah.
programs goes on for like several days, and it builds it up to finding the top album. And so, like, that's the first time I heard of Achtung Baby and Joshua Tree as a kid. Of
Yeah.
seeing that, so I heard the big like '90s singles and stuff. But that's when so Joshua Tree was ranked first on the top 100 albums list,
Wow.
and Achtung Baby was like 20th, I think. I still remember it to this day. I'll just let that settle in. So like, so that made me really interested. Um, but yeah, also, so, so sorry, go. If you edit this out, I just remember a point. What
That's
was I going to
fine.
say? What was I saying just before you two? Oh, Paul McCartney. So anyway,
Mm.
so I got into like Wings due to seeing another documentary on TV. So it's like
Yeah.
you couldn't just stream what you wanted, so you just like saw this stuff. And I got Sea Moon. Have you heard of Sea Moon by Paul McCartney? That was
Oh,
became my alarm. It's like a B side that was on because the Paul McCartney song "Hi Hi Hi" had too many drug references in, so BBC did the B side as the main single.
right.
And like the fridge thing, I put it on as my alarm clock, like on my phone. It was like the time that beautiful age of mobile technology where you could set a song as your like ringtone or your alarm
Yeah.
clock. And I absolutely hate that song now because it's like every time I had to get up, like opening the fridge, every time I had to get up was because of Yeah, I knew I'd get to the point and how it related. Like every time I had to get up was like, I was like, oh man, I have to get up, and there's like do 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 that like little funky melody. So it went from being one of my favorites to one of my least favorite songs.
That's
And I think
perfect.
let's bring it back to U2. That's what they learned from that experience of doing that album on everyone's phones.
That's great. We've got to end there because that's such a great story.
Anyway.
But yes, if you donate to our Patreon, you can get a bonus episode of this here podcast every week. Next, I think it's going to be blind spotting. I think I've teased Rob with giving him an excuse to talk about clipping for so long, and I'm finally going to pull the trigger on that. But until we've got a load of other stuff on our Patreon as well. Actually, I've just started doing X-Files reviews on there. We've got a new podcast, Uncut from the Video Store, where we look back at horror franchises from the past. Yeah, and loads of other stuff. So, but until then, we'll be back in a fortnight with another episode of Pop Screen. I've been Graham.
I've been Joe.
And we'll see you in 2 weeks' time.